According to the employers, not having enough experience. I think, and sometimes I think it could be a bit to do with my age. I'm 28.
My behaviour. Well, I did a lot of stupid things. You know, I let my emotions get the best of me, and growing up in a drug environment, if you will, I was always surrounded by other criminals and other drug addicts, and I guess the only coping mechanism that I had when I experienced emotional trauma was to fall back on, especially marijuana. It was very easy for me personally to quit meth. I mean, like, obviously it was incredibly hard, but compared to marijuana, it was easy to quit meth because I hated meth. I hated what it had done to me. I hated what it had done to the people around me. Well, marijuana is in my experience at least, there was like a bit of a culture to it, and it was never viewed as a bad thing. And so it was really, really hard to give that up, you know, in order to pursue my dreams.
In the field of teaching horticulture and conservation and land management, the University of Melbourne closed their rural campuses, most of them, and the ones in the area where I am located. A number of the TAFE colleges no longer present courses relating to those topics. Some of them do, but there's very few places. It's astonishing that in a rural area there is so little education in those fields which are so pertinent to a rural area. But I think that's one of the main reasons. I get work, you know, in the elections. I work for the electoral offices and the census. I've been area supervisor for the census for the last 4 or 5 censuses. You know, that sort of clerical government work is available, but now age, I've stopped putting age, you know, my age in applications, and I get the odd interview. Being a qualified horticulturalist, but I wore my knees out being a gardener, so it's hard to get work in that practical work in the horticultural field than it used to be. The farming I can manage, but and for me also the distance, being unemployed, you know. But I have had taken jobs that required travelling 1.5 hours there and back each day to maintain that employment. So it's not a lack of will, but there's just not many opportunities in my field about it at the moment, though there previously had been.
Marijuana. It was just as what I said prior. Once I started smoking marijuana and that, I just lost a lot of motivation to where I wanted to go. You know, I had a big plan of being qualified in 3 years. Once I've been qualified in 3 years, go to the army and then be a mechanic in the army. But then I picked up the marijuana and I lost all the motivation and what I wanted to do. My dream goals just kept changing every week, I guess. And I just lost interest in being a mechanic and started falling behind in my work, in my schooling, and a lot of other places as well.
My disability. With my disability, it takes me longer to learn things like computers and all that, and cameras, and because I'm not really a tech savvy type of person. I'm sort of like the old school books mainly.
I think it could be to do, well, have to be a bit harsh, maybe favouritism. Like people, it's who you know, not what you know, but who you know. That can lead to favouritism, unfortunately. I think that also has a bit to do with the personality.
Well, I don't know. I think that unemployment is something that affects, you know, a lot of people worldwide. And so to try to pinpoint one particular problem would be incredibly hard. I do think that substance abuse is a big issue, but there's also a lot of people who are employed that abuse substances. So I guess some people are better at hiding it than others. Others are more open about it. I know for me personally, when I was smoking a lot of marijuana, I had no drive to get a job. And I would, when I would apply for my 20 jobs per fortnight, I would often hope that I didn't get one because I really didn't want to go to work. And I think that there's a lot of people that have a similar viewpoint. And then it's just so emotionally draining when you decide you do want to work, but nobody wants to help you. You know, if you've got a massive gap on your resume, that's a big hard thing too. A lot of people think I have a 3-year gap because I was, using drugs, but I was looking after my mother for the last 2 years before she passed away, and that's why I have such a big gap on my resume. A lot of the drug use took place while I was employed. And leading up to employment, all through high school I was on drugs, but the teachers never noticed because I had good grades. Just no one notices. The people who are not involved in the problem aren't paying attention to the problem, and the people who are part of the problem might not think that it's a problem. Or maybe they do, but they're scared of what their friends might think if they were to act like a pussy or a nerd, for instance.
The issues of originally being a mining community, the mines closed, then the power generation, why they can't invest in huge renewable stuff and push that, I don't know. There would be some jobs. Things aren't as labour intensive, they're mechanised. People aren't trained, they talk about retraining people for positions. There doesn't seem to be any a lot of retraining available. For as soon as I got to 60, I still apply for jobs. That's my own choice. But they just said, go and volunteer somewhere 15 hours a week and we'll give you a new start. And otherwise you have to travel to our employment office and they'll teach you how to write your own resume, for heaven's sake. How many years have I been doing that for? I've even taught people how to do that. But the futile, at least when you're volunteering you do something, but I just don't think they're by virtue of the lower populations and wider distances for people to travel, they would probably be happy if the majority of the rural population moved to Melbourne, and then they wouldn't be required to provide social services or think about things like education and employment in rural areas, and only have large-scale international corporate farming, so there were no families to worry about, no medical services to offer.
Drugs. I reckon drugs would be the most highest rateable thing in the Latrobe Valley that stops people from getting employed. I find that a lot of employers know that there's a lot of drugs going around in Morwell or in the Latrobe Valley. And I think they kind of just pick on who they want, which is a good way of being, but then again it stops other people getting a good shot at being employed.
Probably when the power station closed down, I think that probably caused a lot of unemployment because the power Hazelwood was the main source of our power, and that's probably why we probably got the highest rate of unemployment here in the valley.
It just seems like, the poverty trap is because it's so hard to find employment, and that's why it's going in an ongoing cycle amongst these young people as well.
I'm not really sure what the poverty trap means, but outsourcing I can elaborate on. I had a bloke staying with me for a while. I have a 1-bedroom flat actually, and I've had 6 different people that have stayed with me in the whole time I've had that flat, which has been 1.5 years. One of those people in particular was a gentleman from Melbourne who was working here in Morwell at the service station. Why wasn't a Morwell citizen given that job? And yeah, it's very hard if you don't have a house, you don't have any money, you don't have any qualifications, then you can't get the job. And if you can't get the job, how are you supposed to save money to get those qualifications, especially if you don't qualify for the concession rate?
Right, the poverty check, the welfare situation where we're up to the fourth generation of people who nobody in their families ever had a job, and because they have no money, they don't have the opportunities to maybe get an education and training in fields which they would have to travel to the city to use anyway. They can no longer remain in the rural areas of their families. Automation, obviously, the more automation, the less manual labour, people hours are required. That's why I think if they're going to concentrate on things like clean, green food in this area and make that a marketing thing, they have to realise that it is going to involve a lot more people hours, and it would provide employment if the government would only seriously encourage it and, seed funding. Outsourcing, again, similar to automation, they outsource it to big companies, multinationals. I remember when all the gardening, horticultural services were privatised by the Kennett government, and all the local horticulturalists lost their jobs, and the New Zealand firms came in because they'd been privatised about 8 years before, and they had it sorted. They had all these commercial companies, and they moved across the Tasman and they took all our jobs. But it didn't help our employment. It's not always the answer. Companies have to think further than their shareholders. If you're going to have a business that does well, you have to have customers as well as satisfied shareholders. My parents had shares. They said you can't afford, always remember you've got to be able to afford to lose the money you have in shareholdings, because companies don't always make a profit every year. But it seems these days companies will cut their throats rather than, take a loss for a year almost. And they just cut back on staff again and again as the panacea to their profit margins. So I think.
I think the government should probably provide more opportunities to find work and maybe fund more places to help people get the training to get a job, and maybe give businesses more of an incentive to employ new people, maybe provide that training aspect. I can't think off the top of my head, but providing more opportunities for training that they can get experience.
Well, you can't put all the blame on the government. I remember a few years back, they brought out new rules that you weren't able to study anything if you had a qualification of that level already. And I can't speak for everyone, but I know that made it quite difficult for me, because I can't study any Certificate 3s anymore because I have a Certificate 3 in security, even though I'm not using that and I have no desire to work in security anymore. So I have to study a Certificate 4 or higher if I want to study. Otherwise, I don't qualify for the concession rate. So I think that the government played a huge part in changing the rules, but it's not their fault, because there are a lot of professional students that were taking advantage of the old system. So they can't spoil it for the rest of us, so to speak. And what I mean by professional student is people that would just continuously study courses so they could keep their Oz study payment on. They had no intention of getting a job.
I think whilst they go along number one, the trickle-down economy where, they give tax breaks to large companies and so the companies will employ more people, does not work. It's been, in other countries they've pushed it as the answer to everything. It hasn't worked. The people with more money buy more Rolls Royces, more swimming pools, they don't pay more poor people to work. So that sort of economics is rubbish, I think. What role do they have? They have to think about encouraging industries that are going to be developing into the future, whether it's building renewable power stations, etc., whether it's encouraging clean, green, organic or not organic, but clean, green agricultural produce, not poisoning our water and soil by having fracking and other gas extractions. Having gas extractions in places where it's safe to do so. Have it automated, but stop saying we're going to build a big power station and that's going to solve all the problems. No, during the building stage there will be jobs. Once it's built there will be no jobs. I'm talking about ongoing employment in industries that will go into the future and provide employment for this generation, maybe the next generation, and be thinking ahead. Should we all be training in technology, electronics? All right, but if we want to eat, we still need to be able to produce clean, green food, and that involves people. The country, especially around here where it's hilly, in hilly areas, you can't have broadacre farming. You know, you can't run a harvester up a slope this steep. It's the things they've also got to realise that across the state and of course across the country, there are different answers required for different regions because the population is made up of different people with different skills. The land is different. You know, while the mallee might be good for wheat, it's not going to be good for for crops that need lots of water. We've got down in Gippsland, beautiful soil, beautiful rainfall for the most part. We could be growing all manner of things, but they've disallowed anyone from building a home on anything less than 100 acres. If you're doing small intensive farming, you can't afford and you don't want to have to maintain 100 acres. You might want to maintain 50 acres. But that's all right, but you can't build a house on it, live there and start a business. So the government has got I don't see why I should know the answers. They've got a lot more thinkers working for them, I hope, except I must say, from somebody who's extremely knowledgeable in the world of encoding, etc., and who has dealt with the government, it seems that the government have stopped employing a lot of intelligent people who write the contracts for the government, you know, whether it be their security, you know, people there writing contracts and they know nothing about the topic which they're writing a contract to employ someone for. You know, we could have all sorts of security problems if somebody, you know, if the government is not willing to employ people who know stuff about the field that they're trying to employ people for. It's just stupid. But the government doesn't know that. They want to, politicians are in for 3 years because then they get the super and that's all they're interested. That's a generalisation, but a lot of them. Such a disappointment.
They keep giving our jobs in Australia to overseas people, and it's not fair on us Australians. We want the jobs, but they keep giving it to people that are not from our part of the town and all that. If you're going to get a job in Australia, make sure you know our language and code and how to do the employment.
Probably, yes. There probably needs to be more money put into the valley and businesses, and there needs to be more of an incentive to hire people that don't have experience or don't have much experience. Yeah, have the mindset that it's about the attitude and the experience.
Of course they are. The government is our government. They're supposed to do everything, right? That's why we elected the people that we elected, so that they could affect change. And then they don't affect the change. You know, the government recently gave all not all, but like a bunch of politicians a $28,000 pay rise that taxpayers are expected to pay for. $28,000 a year, that's more than a lot of people I know earn in a year.
Not entirely. Big business is obviously a part of it. There is a world downturn. I don't know why the governments think that perpetual growth is the answer to everything. You know, there's only so much in the way of resources, and we already have too many people on this planet for all people to be eating and living well. I think there's a lot of issues, not just the government, but I think they should be thinking of better solutions than giving large multinationals tax breaks and bringing more and more people into our country. When everybody here is on a good wicket, decent wage, decent education, decent house, then I think that's when we look to bring more people into our country. I'm not anti-immigration at any stage, not anti-refugees. I'd love to give everybody a home. But you've got to sort of sort your own backyard out first if you want to be able to help other people. And all right, be living in a third world country isn't the end of the world, but it would be better if we could strive, even just those standards are enough to eat, an education, house, roof over your head, good community, and that encompasses all Australians, the first Australians and all of us.
Well, yeah, I have a lot of with the graphic design jobs that I've been trying to get into. I actually have the qualifications for that. But then when I went to get a job there, they said you need experience, but I had the qualifications already and I couldn't get experience without experience.
I have thousands of opinions, man. We could be here all day. The most important thing I can say is life is full of temptation, and you should try to avoid letting temptation get the best of you. Everything's fine in moderation, but I would steer clear of methamphetamine and try to avoid taking up smoking cigarettes, because that's very hard to quit. If you're already smoking cigarettes, I'm sure you're aware of that. I think alcohol is probably the worst drug on the planet, but for some reason it's legal, and I'm trying to stay clean, so every now and then I'll have a drink, but I never get drunk anymore. Again, all I can say is just keep moving, don't stay in one spot. The definition of insanity is trying the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result.
I've enjoyed this process of talking to this group of people who are creating this documentary, and I wish them luck, and I look forward to seeing the finished product, and also hopefully you gathering all these different opinions on this topic might be able to get, knowing what's going on at the ground level is the best thing that you can do as far as trying to get the powers that be to do something effective about the topic of employment and long-term underemployment.
A lady called Robin Horvath, which was a teacher from Coney College here in Moore, she told me that with a disability it is much harder for us people with disabilities to get a job, because they think us as people with disabilities are stupid and dumb, that we don't know how to do things. But if you give us a chance, yeah, we can do things normal people can do. Just give us a chance, maybe give us some work experience, maybe an internship to show what we are worth. To all those employers out there, please give us people with disabilities a chance. We want to get a job, we want to help you get your name out so you can get more customers. So that's my message.
I was part of HIH when it was a massive insurance company collapsed, and so I was actually employed by them. So that's how I was unemployed. But yeah, but I think that I was lucky. It was at a time we decided to move up here, and I actually said we wouldn't move up here unless one of us had a job. So I went for a job at pathology, I got it, and then we put our house on the market. So I've been very, very blessed. I know it's not that easy for a lot of people, but that's been my experience with it. And I bought this business, so when I was ready to leave pathology, I was buying this business. So it was all good, But I've seen much people in shocking situations due to just there are very few jobs. It's very tough at the moment. don't know. There's a little bit of a fear going around that businesses tend to be quite conservative. It's if you worry that things are going to be quiet for a while, like say when the mine fire hit, when the mine closed, it's one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. We had Spotlight close, that kind of began things. Then we had the mine fire, the global financial crisis, the mine closing down. Every time one of those things happen, you kind of brace yourself for can you employ someone at the moment, and you wait. And then we got hit with something else. We thought, oh, we're going to be okay, we're getting busier, again we're going, the mine fire took 2 years to recover from and get back to our former amount of people who were coming in, and by the time that happened then the mine closed, and it was like, oh, for heaven's sake, stop it. So you have to be quite conservative, you have to try and maintain your profit margin, and then everything's going up, so you have to be careful there. You have to be able to afford to have an employee. For that you have to have enough customers coming in to warrant that, and that's what the tricky bit is, you wait. And the thing is that you become more and more conservative the whole time. And that's the difficulty with it, that small businesses in particular will become more and more conservative, and because you have to have the money to pay your electricity bills, pay your current staff. If something breaks, you've got to be able to afford to buy another one. Plus you don't want to put your prices up through the roof, because you end up being this place that certainly makes money, but you've got nobody in there, you've got no atmosphere at all where people want to come and enjoy themselves. So that conservatism is a thing that becomes a habit, and then also you've got people who go, there are also people who are handing in resumes who aren't interested in working in your place, they're doing it because they have to. They have to put in resumes to have a certain amount of for settling purposes, so that spoils it a bit. Also, there's a thing that happens when you're long-term unemployed, that you get a bit, you haven't got any hope left, so when you come into an establishment, you're not saying, hi, how you going? You've got to be really charming and lovely, even when you're feeling bad. So we've often given out advice, you come across so well. If we had a job, we would definitely give you because you do lose hope a bit when you're constantly banging your head against a brick wall. So anyone unemployed can also fake it till you make it. Make sure you've got that beautiful personality on display and show an interest in the actual employee, in the establishment that you are going to hand your resume into. And people write a note on it, lovely person, I do. So, that sort of thing, even if they've got something now, if you can make a great impression, it's worth doing it, because they will hang on to your resumes with notes on it. That's a massive question. The government needs to be unpopular sometimes and make decisions that will really help people to get out of this spiral. I feel like we're in a spiral. We need to educate people about drugs, etc. We need to snip that in the bud. We need to improve manners amongst people towards your fellow human being. The government needs to be unpopular. They need to make the decisions that will help us to all become a society that genuinely cares about each other again. We need to be producing things and to continue our policies of trying to buy locally, really getting it and explain to people how important it is to support our local businesses. Everyone says they know about it, but when you can buy on eBay or you can buy at Harvey Norman, look at the prices on both, and if it's only a small amount of difference, remembering Harvey Normans will often drop something off their price if you ask them, because they are competitive. So try and think of our local stores as part of your online shopping experience that you can buy in person at Harvey Norman if you look online and see what their prices are as well. So to try and include everybody in your shopping, because we'll all miss it when there are no shopping centres, but we'll also miss it when there are no retail jobs available anymore. So we've got to start thinking like that. We need nice education that's not paying lip service to it, but that explains it properly so that we don't have to work it out. It's got a share of it. I think that there was a lot of money thrown at Morwell and the Latrobe Valley when the mine closed, etc. I question how wisely money's being spent. I think that we needed things done really quickly because we can't slump completely and lose our infrastructure and so on. Money's been thrown at stupid things, but I'd like also for some really sensible stuff to be thought about and money kept aside for the stuff that probably needs a little bit more thought. It's not just that, it's a general thing where we're buying so much online without looking at what our local shops have to offer. We're also being knocked for six by how expensive petrol's become, how expensive gas and electricity have become. You know, we need some regulation on that. I hate to say it, but that does have to happen because we can't have the rich getting richer and more of us going into the poverty area. We can't. So what's some unpopular decisions? Spending money wisely by governments is absolutely paramount. They're wasting our money. I always say, if you give me $10,000 to spend, I will blow it. If I earn the $10,000, I'll be very careful with how I spend it. So when governments have a lot of money they can spend, so on, I question how carefully it's being spent.
I think definitely we've taken some big hits with industry closures for sure. And I think, you know, because it's largely out of our local community's control when these corporates will close and when they'll move on. So we don't have a lot we can do about that in terms of time frames and, you know, really looking after the community. We're really going to somebody else's agenda. So I think the impact has been huge. I don't think it's, I feel like it's sort of rocked the core of the community, but it's not going to define us. It's actually given us another, you know, yardstick to measure ourselves by and to aim against, you know, and go, you know, that's happened. But in many ways, I think it's brought the community together. And in terms of the impact of businesses, I think, look, that is difficult because I know, especially some of the local businesses in Morwell, they'll definitely hurt from those closures. And more, you know, the broader Latrobe Valley, but, you know, where there is a lot of work being done to support local businesses and to support the community as a whole. And I think that's coming from a range of spaces. That's coming from, you know, government to local government to business groups to community leaders like myself. So it's not, you know, it's not one person's on it. So that's where I think it's sort of brought the community together a little bit. We've all got our role to play. In terms of the long-term impact, I think it's given us a bit of a measure of where we are now and then where we want to go. So I actually see a bright future for Latrobe Valley and Morwell. Because I think the opportunities now are to, you know, regroup and really look at our future, and, you know, there's opportunities, business opportunities that will be available and that are coming in, and it is my big hope that, you know, things like earthworker, things that are around, you know, blue collar workers and manufacturing, that Morwell gets a bit of a look in with those because there's a workforce here ready to go. That I think can tap into some of that, and it would, you know, benefit the whole fabric of the community. So I think this is successive governments' failure to actually address the unemployment rate across the country. But I would say that Morwell is sort of the epicentre of that, where industries are closing, industries have left. It's this is what privatisation looks like in 20 years. If you're thinking about privatising your electricity or your, other essential services and you're in another state, look at Morwell. This is what happens. It might look great for the first 5 years, I don't know, but 20 years, 30 years down the track, this is where we're going to be. So I think the lessons to be learned out of Morwell and what's happened with privatisation and industry closure are, definitely something you can't ignore. And it's something that whenever I'm speaking about it, I always reference the people I'm speaking to back to Morwell. This is what it looks like. And if this is what you want for your community, then privatisation is for you. But if you're not wanting to have high unemployment rates and health outcomes that are very, very challenged, and there's a whole community that has suffered under privatisation because we haven't put the supports in to manage it.